the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Shalom, dear friends. Welcome back to our new experience of the uh, miracles before the final event of the Exodus. We began with a plague account dealing with a series of devastations for Pharaoh and Egyptians. The arrogant question of Pharaoh in chapter 5:12, who is the Lord that I should heed this plea to let Israel go, is responded with a series of disputes between Pharaoh and Moses. What is seen in these plagues is the superiority of God and his emissaries. God's presence in the land is shown by his shielding the people's land from the plagues, and God's incomparability is suggested also by the statement that the likes of the plagues had never been seen before. The plagues are both punishment inflicted upon Pharaoh for his refusal to let his people go, and a demonstration of God's power in holy war. Although in the rereading we have attempted to offer some natural and scientific explanation, the emphasis is on the stunning and unrepeatable character. God is in control, and God's natural manipulation of natural elements is a way of revealing his sole divinity. With this note, we shall continue with the fourth plague. The fourth plague in chapter 8, 20 to 32 deals with the flies. Moses and Aaron brought swarms of flies to all over Egypt, except on Goshen, where the people of Israel lived together. Pharaoh asked Moses and Aaron to offer sacrifice in the land of Egypt. Moses insisted that Pharaoh should allow the people 3 days' journey into the wilderness. Why 3 days' journey into the wilderness? We can see how cunning Moses was. He wants to worship Yahweh in the wilderness, outside the domain of Pharaoh. So he wants a 3-day head start. Pharaoh agreed to send them to the wilderness. There is a condition. They should not go far away. They should continue to be within the domain of the territory of Pharaoh. And they should intercede to God for Pharaoh. Moses prayed, and the plague was removed. The Egyptians are physically very close to the Hebrews, at least according to this text. So, Egyptians would be able to view the sacrifices offered by the Hebrews in chapter 8, verse 26. In any event, the animal sacrifice of the Hebrews would upset the religious sensitivities of the Egyptians, because the way the Egyptians looked on the animals is different from the way Israelites looked at it. Because animals had a conspicuous place in Egyptian religion. Thus, a sacrifice of whole animal was not the usual practice among the Egyptians. Now, what is significant is Pharaoh is to admit that Yahweh is present in Egypt. Exodus 8:22, which says, "Let my people go. On that day I will set apart the land of Goshen where my people live, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am in this land." Once again, Moses is to pray on behalf of the mighty ruler of Egypt. However, Pharaoh again reneged and withdrew permission. The story continues as before. Chapter 8:32 tells us that Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and would not let the people go. I would suggest a rereading. From ancient times, stinging gnats or mosquitoes have plagued Egypt, especially during the autumn season. The Nile, receding from its overflow, leaves stagnant pools of water in which the insects breed. Let's move to the fifth plague in chapter 9, 1 to 7, which is regarding the cattle plague. In this account, there is no negotiation between Moses and Pharaoh. However, there is a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites, as Pharaoh did not act within the given time. All the cattle of the Egyptians were killed by this plague inflicted by Yahweh. Instead, the cattle of Israelites were safe. If you look at Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 5, pestilence personified appears as one of the Lord's destructive agents. This pestilence is regarded as the smiting by God's hand. And I would like to suggest a rereading of this plague as well. In the ancient world, diseases, diseases are described as the hand of destructive deities. We know from our modern situation instances of anthrax that has eliminated a herd of animals, a bacterial disease of animals, especially of cattle and sheep. So they could have resulted from conditions created by the insects and spread by them. As we move to the sixth plague, chapter 9, 8 to 12, which deal with the boils. The narrator tells us that Egypt was further punished for the refusal of Pharaoh to let Israelites go to offer sacrifices to God. That was a request made to Pharaoh by Moses on behalf of the people. In the presence of Pharaoh and his magicians, Moses took some ashes from the kiln and threw them toward heaven, and they become boils, causing sores on human beings and beasts. Now, the problem is if the previous plague killed all cattle, he said all cattle, were there still any beast left in the land? Let's overlook that question. The first to afflict humans as well as livestock um, because of these boils, and they afflict the knees and the legs, as attested also in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 35. These boils may refer to any skin inflammations because in Hebrew it is given to be hot. Their festering suggests malignant pustules that characterize anthrax. Even the magicians of Egypt too suffer skin disease, and they are unable to stand in the presence of Moses. So that biblical text tells us that even the magicians of Egypt are normal people. They do not have any divine power. Although all Egyptians suffered under this plague, Pharaoh's heart became more hardened, and that leading to the successive and remaining plagues. We would notice now the suspense increases. There's a movement from human to divine. The second longest narrative among the plagues is the seventh plague, which we'll take up now in chapter 9, 13 to 35. The seventh plague, the hailstones. Friends, the next three plagues, the final three plagues, shift the focus from competition between Moses and Aaron and the Egyptian magicians. So there's a move um, of a drama from water and land to the heavens. The first three were in the water, then in the land, and now to the heavens. The apocalyptic conflict between God and Pharaoh is played now directly. Even the divine agenda is changed from a simple request for proper worship to the divine cosmic plan to unleash all my blows upon all the Egyptians. There is a move. The drama now increases its character in order that Pharaoh will learn that there is no one like the God of Israel. Verse 14, no one like the God of Israel, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. God has spared Egypt so far in order to declare to Pharaoh that Yahweh's name is supreme over all the earth. Now, it is not a failure for Yahweh. Egyptians are given a chance to respond in bringing their livestock from the fields. In Exodus 9:14, for this time I will send all my plagues upon you yourself and upon your officials and upon your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. What follows is very important. Pharaoh concedes, he admits guilt, and he succumbs to the pressure. Remember, for the first time, Pharaoh confesses that he is beaten. In verse 27, we have the mea culpa of Pharaoh. He says, I have sinned. The Lord is just. It is I and my subjects who are at fault. Truly remarkable confession from a person who deified himself, who made himself equal to God, and he acknowledges the earth belongs to Yahweh. In verse 29, the earth belongs to Yahweh. The God of Israel is receiving a more fitting recognition from this mighty Egyptian God called Pharaoh, accepting the sovereignty of Yahweh. Now we can see the tension is building up again, as in verse 35, Pharaoh once again refuses. It says, the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. Unfortunately, the punishments failed to change the heart of Pharaoh. Shall I suggest another rereading of this plague? The plague involves a massive rainstorm. In verse 33, thunder and the hail and the rain no longer pour down on the earth. So Psalm 78:47 speaks of a plague of hail combined with the frost, and Psalm 105 combines hails with lightning. And hailstorm is common to Israel and to its neighbors. In Genesis chapter 19:24, remember, it combines with the burning sulfur, evoking the east wind storm. In Arabic, it is called kamsin. People who live in the Middle East are aware of this kamsin, the blowing of the desert from the east during the dry season. The clue is given in chapter 9, verse 31 and 32, which speaks about the time of the year after the flax and barley ripened, but before the wheat crop. It is common in Egypt. Flax is cultivated in late January and barley in February. Therefore, the seventh plague incidentally can be dated to around the middle or end of January when the crops begin to mature. The eighth plague, chapter 10, verse 1 to 20, is about locusts. It opens with the explanation of the hardness of the heart of Pharaoh and his servants. The obduracy is calculated to demonstrate Yahweh's might. The aim is to reach the descendants of Israel in verse 2, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I have made fools of the Egyptians and what signs I have done among them. What is the purpose? So that you may know that I am the Lord. So that you may know that I am the Lord. So it is meant both for generations of Israelites and that of the Egyptians. So this theme anticipates the celebration of Passover, which we will take up in detail in Exodus chapters 12 and 13. Now, for the first time, Pharaoh's own servants are becoming exasperated to the point of urging Pharaoh to release the people of Israel. Pharaoh's official, verse 7, how long shall this fellow be a snare to us? Let the people go. The result of this intervention is that Moses and Aaron are recalled for negotiation. Pharaoh is presented as the only Egyptian who still needs conviction, who needs to be convinced. Now, even the servants, the officials of Pharaoh are convinced that Pharaoh should allow Israelites to go. Now, at the insistence of the courtiers, Pharaoh attempts to negotiate before the 24-hour deadline given in chapter 9, verse 5. The Lord set a time, saying, tomorrow, the Lord will do this thing in the land. Now, Pharaoh allows only the men to go, since adult males took part in the religious rites. When you go up to chapter 23:17, there are 3 times in the year, Bible says, all your males shall stand before the Lord. So Pharaoh seems to be aware of this law. But Moses wanted all the Hebrews, young and old, male and female, with their cattle along. Now, Pharaoh was suspicious about the hidden agenda of Moses and Aaron, which is clearly given from verses 8 to 11. Since the demand was rejected, Moses called for the next plague. Accordingly, we see the arrival of locusts festering and covering the whole land of Egypt. There is a progress in depicting Pharaoh's change of character, which is found in verses 16 to 17. In 16 says, Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Do forgive my sin just this once, and pray to the Lord your God that at the least he remove this deadly thing from me. After the customary request for forgiveness and the successful outcome of the request, the story continues. The locusts were removed, seeking forgiveness, and the plague is removed. However, however, the same story is repeated. Verse 20. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and he would not let the Israelites go. I would propose a rereading of this plague as well. When you take Joel chapter 2, clouds of locusts were a familiar pestilence to farmers in the whole of ancient Near East. And the locust is pictured as a natural phenomenon in chapter 14, 21, Deuteronomy chapter 11 and chapter 31 and so on. So there's a massive east wind storm, as in verse 13, brings all the locusts. And it's a major problem which is prevalent in the entire ancient Middle East. So Psalm 78 speaks of the locust with a caterpillar. Psalm 105 brings it with the grasshoppers. In Psalm 78:46, the locusts are presented in the context of a harvest. And Psalm 105:35, it destroys all the crops, which means the destruction of spring or summer crops, leading to famine for the entire year. Instead, the west wind at the end of the plague drove off the destructive locust into the Red Sea in verse 19. So this anticipates the hurling the Egyptians into the sea, Exodus chapter 14. So there's already a preview of the great scene at the sea. How do we explain this as a natural event? As I mentioned earlier, there's an extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events that at this moment the natural force of the east wind bringing the locust and the west wind taking away, and the ninth plague is the darkness that filled the entire land of Egypt with thick darkness for days. This plague is not narrated in Psalms 78 and Psalm 105. And this plague took place in a devastating way that life in Egypt came to a standstill. However, Goshen, the place where Israelites remained, was spared. Now there is a partial offer by Pharaoh to Moses. All Hebrews could go for worship, but they cannot take the cattle with them. Remember, the request was to take all people with cattle. Now Moses' stand: all Hebrews with all their possession should go out into the wilderness. No solution is found. As a result, darkness, symbol of the wrath of God and divine punishment. So this too presupposes a picture of a massive calm scene, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. The destructive east wind darkening the sky, similar to the one in the prophet Joel chapter 2 verse 2. It is quite common during the springtime, like from March to April, the appearance of this comes in with so much of dust and sand. The air is darkened and the breathing becomes difficult. I myself have witnessed it in um, in the Middle East. Naturally, it goes on for about 3 days. So it's a natural explanation. Now, the negotiation between Pharaoh and Moses takes place, but Pharaoh, as I mentioned, refused to release the animals. Now, what is important is and ironic is that animals are needed for sacrifice. How can they sacrifice without the animals? So, at this moment, the refusal of Pharaoh to allow the animals increases the tension, and that leads us to the future and final audience with Moses. The ninth plague ends with a stalemate with Pharaoh, threatening to kill Moses if he comes to Pharaoh again. Moses leaves Pharaoh in hot anger, a mark of Pharaoh's obduracy, but also Moses' increasing mastery. Moses too declared that he would not see Pharaoh again. Chapter 10, verse 28 to 29. And that takes us to the 10th plague, which is announced in chapter 11, 1 to 10, and the announcement of the firstborn, the death of the firstborn of Egypt. So, till the next scene, wish you God's blessing and shalom.
Thank you, Lord, for the gift and love of your sacred word. Open our hearts to put into practice that which you have revealed to us through your word. Amen.